everyone, this is Celine from Blue Cala Patterns, and welcome to video 4 for the Lunaria satchel. In this video we're going to attach our main body exterior panels to our assembled gusset, and we're also going to construct our flap. So what we will do to start is make sure that you have your bottom center marks at the bottom here of your exterior main body panels. I'm just going to transfer the mark I made here. And then for the gusset, you don't need to figure out the center because the center should be this center seam. So what I do is I start by lining up the center marks, and I put a clip, and then I line up the top corner here with the top corner of the gusset, and then I clip everything in between. And I find it easier to do it this way with the main body panel facing you because it just makes it easier to ease the gusset around the curve of the main body piece. So I usually leave the corner for last. Okay, and if you really want to make sure that there's no movement in the corner here, feel free to add a lot of clips. Okay, and then I do the same for the second side. Okay, so now I'm going to sew these together. I start at one corner, I backstitch, and then I think this might be a little bit blown up there. Hopefully you can see it better now. I'm going to take this out of the way too. So now I'm going to start at this corner here, a backstitch, so all the way around, and then when I get to the other corner, I backstitch again. Okay, so I've sewn the first main body panel to the gusset. This is what it looks like on this side. Now I'm going to trim my seam allowance. And then I'm just going to repeat exactly the same steps and attach the second main body panel to the other side of the gusset. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video, sew on the second main body panel, and then we can start on our flap. Okay, so I've sewn both main body exterior panels to my exterior gusset. Now I can set this aside for now and I'll assemble my flap. So what you'll need is your flap pattern piece, your zipper, your zipper tabs, the other two pieces for your magnetic snap, and your flap exterior piece, well, the front and the underside of the flap, and then your two flap lining pieces. So we're going to start by marking our centers. With the lining pieces, I actually want, I want to fold them in half vertically, wrong sides together, and mark the center along this bottom curved edge. Okay, and you'll do the same for the second. For the flap exterior pieces, we want to have the bottom center on the wrong side marked. So fold them in half vertically, right sides together, and mark that center on the wrong side. Okay, and then we are going to install the other half of our snap. You'll also need a small scrap of something. I'm using Peltex. That's just to reinforce the location where we're installing the snap. So use your flat pattern piece and place it over top of whichever piece, exterior piece is going to be the underside of your flap. Okay, and mark the location of the snap. And then this is really a repetition of what we did to install the other half of the snap to the front pocket. And my seam ripper. All right, so again, we're just making the holes for the prongs of our snap. Now the half of the snap that you should be installing is the thinner half. You see this is much thinner than the other part. Again, if you're using fabric, make sure you apply a drop of fray check for each of the holes. And then again, I'm just going to press. Where did I put my cutter? Be nice if I was a bit more organized, I guess. So I'm just cutting a hole in the Peltex for the prongs. Place the washer. And then spread the prongs. Now, because I have fleece protecting this fabric here, I'm not going to worry too much about this damaging the fabric. The fleece will protect it. Okay, and I'm going to pause the video now because I need to set up my iron so that we can press the zipper tabs. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that you also need to mark the centers on your zipper. So if you're using zipper tape like I am, you'll have 13 inches of zipper tape, which means that the center will be 6.5 inches from each end. And I want you to make a center mark along both edges of the zipper tape. If you're using a 12-inch pre-made zipper, then you'll want to measure 6 inches from the zipper stops at either end and do the same marks. Okay, so I have a bit of a messy interfacing job, so I'm just going to trim away here a little bit of the interfacing. Okay, so all we do is fold in half along the 2-inch side, and then open that up and you should have a center crease. Fold in this half towards that center crease and press. I'm using metallic SX linen, which is it's a little bit harder to press it and get it to stay in the right position. Okay, so both halves in towards the center, and then I'm going to fold again in half along that original crease. And because it's being stubborn, I'm just going to use a clip to hold it in place for now. Okay, and then I'm going to pause the video and I'll press this one the same way. Okay, so I have my zipper and my 2 zipper tabs. Now, if you're using a 12-inch pre-made zipper, you're going to need to trim a little bit at the ends of your zipper. So I want you to measure 1/2 inch from the metal zipper end, measure 1/2 inch and then trim whatever is left, and do the same on the other side. I'm using zipper tape, which is exactly 13 inches, which is the final length that we want. So I don't need to do any trimming on my zipper. So we're going to attach our zipper tabs. Just open up a zipper tab to reveal that center crease and then insert the end of your zipper in between. So open it up, insert your zipper, close it up, and then use clips to hold it in place. And then I'm going to go over to my machine and I'm going to sew the zipper tabs onto my zipper, the edge here closer to the zipper with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, both zipper tabs are sewn on. Now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim a little bit of the zipper tabs so that they're the same width as the zipper tape. And now your zipper is ready. So the next step, you're going to take one of your flap lining pieces. Okay, and then you're going to take your zipper, and so I'm just going to, for now, I'm just going to push my pulls to one end. So you're going to start by pinning. You want the flap lining piece to be right side facing up, and you also want your zipper to be right side facing up. So start by lining up the center marks, the one on your zipper with the one on your flap lining piece, and pin them together at that spot. And then slowly clip the rest or pin the rest, following the curve. Now you'll note that it doesn't go all the way to the end, and that's done intentionally. Use a lot of clips because there's a curve. You really want it, sorry, that's my iron turning off. You really want it to follow the curve nicely, so use a lot of pins or clips. And when this is pinned in place, you'll just go over to your machine, and for now, just quickly baste your zipper in place with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from that bottom edge. It's just a quick basting stitch at this point. Okay, so I'm just going to go over to my machine and baste this in place. Okay, so the zipper is basted to the lining piece. Now I'm going to take my flap underside exterior piece, and I'm going to pin this so that everything is right sides together. Start by the center mark at the bottom, and then you're doing exactly the same thing. You're just pinning the curved edges together. Now I think it's better if you start with this, because the little notch, you want this little notch to be aligned, and then pin the rest. Now it's going to want to curve upwards a bit because of the width of the zipper tape. That's okay, just let it curve upwards a bit. It's not going to make a difference. And this time we're going to sew through all the layers to sew them together, and you're going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're going to make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Now obviously this isn't a completely straight line because you have these little notches at the end. So follow 1/4 inch seam allowance, start here, rotate, and then sew all the way around the curve, and then stop here and rotate, and then finish off here. So you're back stitching here and here in this step. Okay, the layers are all sewn together. I'm going to show you from the wrong side because there's more contrast here between the stitching. You can't really see it on the black vinyl side. Now I'm just going to notch a little bit here at the corner. So you're not cutting any stitches here, you're just notching a little bit so that it sits better. Okay, and then flip these so that they are wrong sides together. Now if you're using fabric for your flap underside, you don't need to worry about pressing very much, but because I'm using vinyl and I can't press it, I'm just going to press from the lining side instead of the vinyl side. And then when I top stitch, I'll just finger press the vinyl. So I'm going to do a little bit of tugging while I press the seam allowance. So because of the curve, it is a little bit annoying to press. Just kind of tug on the fabric while you're pressing the seam allowance, and it should work. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to the machine and I'll top stitch. And when I'm top stitching, I'm not going all the way from end to end. I'm just going to start here where the zipper tab starts, and I'll back stitch, and then I'll top stitch along the curve. And then when I get to the end of the other zipper tab, I'll stop and I'll back stitch again, and then I'll end my top stitching there. Okay, so I finished the top stitching, and I'm showing you the underside so that you can see the contrasting color of the thread. So you see it starts here and stops here. You're not sewing at all on this portion of the flap. Now we're just going to repeat exactly the same steps, and we're going to attach the remaining lining panel first by basting it on, and then we're going to sew the remaining exterior piece over top. So you're doing exactly the same steps that we've just done, and you're going to attach the two remaining panels to this other side of the zipper. So when you're at the point where you want to top stitch the second halves, it will be a little bit tricky because of that curved zipper. So you really have to open your zipper all the way and then go really, really slowly when you're pressing. So I tug down on the lining piece, and then I just press little portions at a time. So it does take a little bit extra time, but it's so much easier to top stitch if you've pressed properly. For the front part here, I actually just pressed in this way. And then I'm going to try and see if this is easier actually. Yes, so just pull down this way, press, and take your time. Also, don't forget to notch that seam allowance just at these corners here so that it sits nice and flat and it doesn't have any puckers. So it's not the easiest to press and top stitch the second half, but it is doable. So I'm going to go over now to the machine and I'll top stitch this same way as I did the other two pieces, stopping and starting at the zipper tabs. Okay, so I've top stitched the second two pieces. Now make sure that your zipper is open all the way. If you have some zipper pulls that are a bit dangly, like mine are, I'm actually going to clip them to make sure they don't go towards the side. I want them to stay where they are, pointing towards the center of the flap. And then what you're going to do is you're going to flip the pieces so that you have the two exterior pieces together, like so. Okay, and I usually start by, so I want the zipper, the curve of the zipper, to go towards the lining. Okay, so align those side seams together. Okay. The key here to getting the nice side seams here is to have these side seams here lined up perfectly. So these are the seams that are going to be at the very ends of the zipper tabs. I'm just going to change the lighting here a bit so hopefully you can see. Okay, so it's like a standard zipper pouch. You're lining up your two exterior sides. We're not going to be sewing this top edge. We need to leave that open for turning the flap. Okay, do the same here. Have the zipper, the curve of the zipper pointed down towards the lining. Okay, have these side seams lined up together and clip. And we do the same thing for the lining pieces. Now, the diagram in step 35 of the pattern, if it's causing you some confusion, hopefully this will help make it a little bit more clear. Okay, so before we clip all the way, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually draw a line. Just going to take this out for 1 second. I'm going to use my ruler. I think this will make this part a little bit easier if I do it this way. So I'm going to move my clips up just a tiny bit, and then I'm going to grab a pen and my ruler, and I'm going to draw a line 1 3/8 of an inch from this straight edge here. And that will actually be our sewing line. I don't want the lining pieces to go all the way to the end because it'll make it too bulky where we're attaching the flap to the bag. Okay, so now I'm just going to finish clipping. So that line is 1 3/8 of an inch from this edge here. And that's going to be where we stop sewing. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my machine. This is, I'm showing you here exactly what it looks like in the diagram. You're going to start from one of the corners here. You're going to backstitch, and you're going to use your regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch, right up until you get a little bit past the side seam here. Then I want you to slowly increase the seam allowance. You're going to start here with 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to start at 3/8 of an inch, and you're going to slowly increase to 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to stop when you reach this line, and you're going to rotate and sew across, and then stop 1/2 inch here from this edge. Go down towards this side seam, and you're going to slowly change your seam allowance from 1/2 inch back to 3/8 of an inch. And then when you get to the side seam here, you continue down all the way with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you backstitch again. So I'm going to repeat it one more time just to make sure that it's very clear. You start at this bottom corner with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You use that seam allowance until you get to the side seam. Then you slowly increase your seam allowance to 1/2 inch. You stop at the line, you rotate, and you sew across. Stop 1/2 inch from this side. Slowly go down and decrease to 3/8 of an inch until you get to the side seam here, and then continue with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to this corner, and then backstitch. So this should be left open, and this here will be sewn 1 3/8 of an inch from this top edge. You're sewing across this line that we just drew. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sew this together, and then we're just going to trim seam allowances and flip our flap right side out. Okay, so the flap is all sewn. I'll show you on this side so that you can actually see the contrasting stitching. So 3/8 of an inch, this is the exterior pieces here. 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then here I slowly increased to 1/2 inch, and I sewed across where we drew that line. So now I'm just going to trim my seam allowances, and then I'm going to flip my flap right side out. Okay, I'm going to take these out now. Okay, so now you have a giant zipper pouch inside your flap. Now, something that is optional here, if you want, you can top stitch the edges of your flap here. I choose not to. I think just pressing it is good, but if you you prefer to top stitch on the edges, you can absolutely do that. That's your choice. Do not know why my iron refuses to steam. It definitely has water. There we go. Okay, and I'm not going to press on the underside because I'm using vinyl. Okay, and now I can close this. Just have a little thread here I want to trim. There we go. Okay, so now I want this part of my flap here to stay together. So I'm just going to do a quick basting stitch, and then we'll attach it to our bag. Okay, so I just like basting the top edge here of my flap layers together so that they don't move. And now you just need to take your the exterior of your bag, center your flap along that top edge of your main body panel, the one on the back that doesn't have the pockets. So just center it in the middle. And then clip it in place, and then you can go over to your machine and just baste it to the back of your bag here along the top. In terms of seam allowance, a 1/4 inch would be fine. Doesn't really matter as long as it's less than 3/8 of an inch. So just go over to your machine and baste this in place, and then the exterior of our bag is done. In the next video, we'll be doing the assembly of the lining of our bag.